Right, a quick recap of the last episode. I had AI trawl through the stock of all Night Flight records in Stockport, and then I had it cross-reference my Spotify listening data with a tool called Last FM to look for artists that were similar to my tastes. It gave me 5 choices. I took the list to the shop where Dean was working. I gave him the list. He found all 5, laid them out for me, and then I was going to buy one of them. This is what happened. I don't know. I think I'm just going to buy them all. I bought 5, not 1, but 5, all based off the recommendations of some software. I didn't listen to them beforehand, no preview, no listening in the shop. I just trusted AI. So in this episode, I'm going to find out what they sounded like, whether I liked them, and whether this whole experiment was a complete waste of time and money. Stay tuned. Now, there's something I want to say before we get into what the selections actually sound like. It's about why I've waited a while to make this part of the episode. Now, when you stream something, skipping costs nothing. If a track doesn't grab you in the first 10 seconds, you can move on, and generally you're probably never going to go back to it. But when you've spent money on a record, it's different. You're more likely to put it on again, partly because you feel you should get your money's worth, and maybe also because taking it off and putting something else on is a bit of a hassle. And that matters a lot for the music that isn't immediate. And none of the 5 records that AI chose grabbed me in the first 10 seconds. Or 30 seconds, to be honest, or probably even 60 seconds. If I'd come across any of them through a streaming algorithm, there's a good chance I'd have skipped past every single one before they'd had a chance to do anything. So I've deliberately not rushed this. They've been on the hi-fi, on and off for a few weeks now, properly sat with more than once each. And for at least a couple of these records, that's changed what I think quite a lot. So first up, we've got Photographs by Graham Lampkin and Jason Lescalate.
So the town is growing by leaps and bounds. Seems like a plan has worked well. It's all fallen into place. Shall I serve soup first? All together.
Graham, you want a chicken vegetable soup?
That'd be very nice, thank you.
It has a little of everything in it.
Now, Lampkin's from Folkestone in the UK, and in the 90s he was in a group called the Shadow Ring. That was proper lo-fi, hissy recordings, deadpan monotone vocals. And when that wound down, he moved further into the pure art sound, field recordings, tape collage, that sort of thing. And Jason Lescalate is American, based in Massachusetts, and comes from an electroacoustic improvisation background, using reel-to-reel tape and that sort of thing, no playing guitars and drums for him. And the idea behind Photographs is that each of them visited each other's home country and then recorded everyday sounds like footsteps, like doors closing, like kettles boiling, like trains going past, that sort of thing. Then they assembled it into one long piece. So it's less of a record in its own right, more a document of two places. It's certainly not music as such. I have to admit, the first time round I listened to this, I was a little bit confused. But after listening to it more and more, it feels more like a composition rather than just recordings of everyday sounds. It's definitely one that rewards patience. But the one thing that really struck me in the shop without listening to it was the packaging. This has to be the nicest packaged CD I own in my entire collection. It folds out into 12 pieces with photographs on each one, but a very tactile packaging as well. It's one of those you can just hold and look at while you're listening to the music. Not the music, the composition, you know what I mean. Next up, we've got Some Days It Rains All Night by Mirror. Now, Mirror is the duo of Andrew Chalk and Christoph Heeman, who are well-known artists in the ambient and drone music scene in Europe especially. Chalk's British and he's been making music since the early 80s. Heeman's German, originally part of an art noise college band from the 80s. And together, as Mirror, they make long, slow-moving pieces built from processed acoustic sources. Piano strings, bells, bowed metal, and so on. And this album has long stretches of near silence throughout it, just with kind of isolated piano pieces drifting in and out. And I think this one, out of all five, probably clicked faster with me, and it stayed clicked. I've really enjoyed this album. And also, out of all of the five, it's probably the most immediate one in terms of having a casual listen. The others are, let's face it, a little bit more demanding, I'd say. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Next one is Minerals by John Collin and Dem Dikey Stare. And what grabbed my attention on this one in the shop was there was a handwritten note on it saying shop favourite. And if you look back at an earlier episode I did at this shop, you'll find out all about their handwritten notes and the importance of them. So Dem Dikey Stare are Sean Canty and Miles Whittaker, a duo who've been releasing music since around 2009 through the Manchester label Modern Love. And John Collin is from Lancashire, and he's into the free folk guitar scene, often playing long acoustic guitar pieces outdoors. So this album is a kind of combination of folk music and dub, and that's an interesting one. But it works really well. And I love this album. And even better, they're local artists. Yeah, I think this is probably the favourite of the five for me. And I think that note was pretty reliable and gave me a bit of confidence I'd like it. And that combination of dub and folk and experimental really works, and it's right up my street, so it's a brilliant pick there. And fourth up, we've got Carlsbad by Nicholas Uttermolen. Now, Utter Molan was a member of Die Teutliche Doris, the Deadly Doris, which was a West Berlin avant-garde band who were around through the early to mid-80s. And this album, Carlsbad, is his only solo album. It was composed for a film, and it's made up of lots of short compositions under 2 minutes long, all played with a small set of acoustic instruments. And there's something slightly off kilter about how they're put together. They're almost like a series of musical sketches, probably closer to folk than experimental. This one definitely feels better played as a whole rather than dipping in and listening to the tracks. It's definitely one for sitting down and listening from beginning to end. And it has grown on me, but it's by no means the favourite of the 5. And finally, the big one, the Heli Polar Egg by Hartmut Gierkin and Michael Ranter. Now this one is nearly 4 hours long, so I have to admit I haven't listened to it completely yet, so you'll just get an initial impression on this one. So Gierkin is a German writer and musician who spent much of the 60s and 70s, I think, living and working across Middle East and Asia, including a long stint in Africa and Iran. And Ranter, the other half, is a percussionist who around the same time was based in Asia, listening to all sorts of non-Western percussion instruments. And this album is built from live recordings that the two of them made while they were touring around the likes of Iran, India, Korea and Japan. And they used a bunch of instruments that they picked up along the way. A whole bunch of bizarre instruments. Tibetan horns, shortwave radios, water gongs, you name it. They used them on this album. It's essentially a travel diary of two people who were traveling around a bunch of countries and were just picking up instruments and trying them out and just improvising with them. So it's needless to say, it's a bit of a tough listen. In fact, it'd be fair to say it's probably the most demanding thing I own in my entire collection. I think the only thing on it that's missing is dogs barking, but I haven't listened to the full 4 hours yet. I mean, when I bought this in the shop, Dean gave me a bit of a look. It was that look. Are you really sure you want to buy this? At the time, I didn't really appreciate it as much as I do now. But I'm going to keep on listening to this. I'll try. There's 4 hours to get through. Now, before I give my overall verdict, I want to be straight with you all about what AI actually did, because I don't want people watching this to think that AI understands music, because it doesn't. In fact, most of what it did was just data processing. It downloaded a bunch of shop listings, which you could do using a spreadsheet and a lot of patience, and similarly for my Spotify listening data. But what it did do was pull on those Last FM threads and look for connections for things that I'd like, and check they're in the shop, and check they weren't on Spotify already. I don't know, recognising that my listening habits point towards experimental, drone and dub. It did all that for artists that I probably, well, I know I wouldn't have discovered. But there's one thing I keep coming back to, is that when I showed Dean the list in the shop, He didn't hesitate. He said straight away, great choices. He found all 5 and laid them out. And that feedback from somebody who's experienced and has curated the shop for years, that was just invaluable. I think maybe if I hadn't had that feedback from Dean, I probably would have walked out without buying any of them, or maybe just one of them. AI just gave me a list based on process and pattern matching, whereas Dean used his experience and knowledge to give me that confidence. And that's not something that a database or AI can do. And funnily enough, just the other day, Spotify announced something that actually lands with this point. They've started adding short videos from their own human editors directly into New Music Friday playlists. Yeah, that's right, real people saying why they've picked something. It's not just a list anymore. So even the company running the world's largest streaming platform has started putting humans back in the loop, because that's what people respond to, and effectively that's what Dean was doing in the shop for me. Now, if I did this again, I'd probably change a couple of things. For a start, I'll feed in my Discogs collection, which contains all my physical purchases, which AI didn't know about. Fortunately, it didn't pick anything I already owned, but it would be useful data for it to work with. And I'd probably want it to cross-reference with a data set other than Last.fm, or more than just Last.fm. There are other tools which probably look at things slightly differently and might throw up different choices. And I think next time I'd want AI to read the shop notes, which are all online, which, as we saw in the episode, proved really useful. And it's that sort of thing, that human context that you just don't get with streaming recommendations. So, a few weeks in, 5 records. Was it a success? Well, I think if you play these records to someone who's not familiar with this sort of music, they'd be completely baffled. They're pretty hardcore experimental music tracks, and probably records most people wouldn't want to listen to. But that's kind of the point. My instincts already know what I like, but I needed something to push past them. And working with all that data, AI found something that I wouldn't have dreamed picking out, listening to, never mind buying. Well, you know, whether that's a success, I don't know. It depends what success looks like, but I'll be living with these records for a while. I'm certainly not bored by them. So I think it's a success. Yeah, it feels like the right result. I'll probably give it another go. So All Night Flight Records is in Stockport. They deliver to, and they've got a great website. Big thanks to Dean for finding all 5 records and letting me film in his shop. So, you know, I'd be really interested to know if you enjoyed this experiment and if you're willing to give it a go yourself. Let me know. Please subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye. I wanted to understand how AI arrived at those choices, what it thought of my listening tastes. So what I did was ask it to summarize my listening tastes based on the Spotify listening data that we used in the experiment. And I have it here, and it's a really interesting read, so I'm going to read it out. It said, your listening sits mostly in a cluster of UK-leaning alternative and experimental genres rather than anything mainstream. The biggest single thread is instrumental, jazz-tinged music, piano-led trio work that blurs into electronica, restless and rhythmically intricate without ever being showy. Sitting close to that is a strand of post-punk built around deadpan, half-spoken or conversational vocals over angular guitars, motoric rhythms and electronic textures. Music that's wiry, dry, and often quite funny in a British way. There's also a consistent pull towards ambient and drone-based electronic music, ranging from glitchy, melancholic textures to more meditative, slow-built pieces, plus a smaller but recurring interest in noise-inflicted experimental rock. On the more song-based side, there's a thread of folk and chamber pop songwriting, understated, often acoustic-led, sometimes with a classical or baroque pop influence, alongside art pop that leans into unusual vocal delivery and unconventional song structures. There's even an occasional foray into hip-hop, though usually the more atmospheric, understated end of it, rather than anything chart-driven. That's a really nice write-up, and it did explain a lot about the choices it arrived at.